Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Final Trade. So, about 18 months ago, I was contacted by a gentleman who said that he was working on developing a new TCG. And yes, man, that is a rough road to take. And so he started asking me some questions, looking for advice. And eventually we got into a relationship where I consulted with him on the development of his TCG, and now it has gone live on Kickstarter. It is the Hero Valor TCG. So, to be upfront, I received last November, he sent me essentially a pre alpha version of the game, pre constructed decks, and a one set of all of the initial release and the first expansion that they had developed of the game for me to play test and give my feedback on. And so I play tested with various people, played a bunch of hands of the game essentially, and gave him my feedback. And it was a very interesting process because when we sit around and we might talk about building magic decks for any given format of magic, there are a lot of things you can do when you're building decks, but when you're developing a new game, there are a lot of knobs you can turn that essentially firm up and become frozen when you release the game. It's all of those design ideas for the base game. And it really makes things a lot more difficult to create a game, to decide on what the rules should be, because changing the rules later on is difficult and has bigger repercussions because essentially you've sold people your product and now you're telling them, well, some of these things might work a little bit differently and stuff like that. So we had a lot of discussion about things like that, about making sure your rules are the way you want them, giving my feedback about what I liked and what I didn't like about the game. And the things that I thought it really did well are that the game is fast and the time the game takes to play is capped. And I think those are two things where Magic can sometimes struggle. And I'm definitely guilty. I play pre-modern Magic, that's my jam. But I definitely enjoy decks like Counter Phoenix and Stasis, the various types of Stasis. There's a blue-white Stasis, there's a mono-blue Stasis. Yes, I play two different Stasis decks in pre-modern Magic. And so I'm kind of that bad guy who sometimes enjoys irregular play patterns, likes to do things like make the game crawl to a stop, because as a wise man once said, it's not always about winning, sometimes it's about making your opponent as angry as possible. But one thing that I really liked about Hero Valor is that it plays quickly. And the game is capped at 8 turns with alternate win conditions at 8 turns. And so you don't have the kind of send your creatures forward towards your opponent and let them block. Instead, you choose who your creatures are attacking amongst your opponent's creatures. And so it plays a lot more like uh, two aggro heavy decks fighting each other, where the board is cleared very often and very quickly, and you really never end up in that situation where you have large forces of creatures on both sides of the board and there's no real good options for attacking. Again, going back to pre-modern Magic, one of the quintessential matchups is red aggro Sly decks against black aggro suicide decks. Very, very in the time period of pre-modern Magic, that is one of the most famous matchups. But even in that, you can end up with the board just stopped up with creatures where no one wants to attack, and you're down to lightning bolts and curse scrolls and duress and things like that to try to move the game along. And so Hero Valor gets around that with its combat system, with the way that you don't simply declare one attack round, your creatures attack once per turn, and you can then play more creatures and then have those new creatures attack. And so it fixes some of those things. And most importantly, one thing I've always said is the biggest problem Magic has is land. That it's the worst part of Magic, and it can never go away. I mean, we could make an unofficial version of Magic where we somehow take land out of the game, but Mana Flood and Mana Screw will forever be a part of Magic. And so in Hero Valor, they simply don't do that. It's simply based on the number of turns into the game up to that maximum of 8. And so I feel like they did a good job of identifying some of the bigger problems with Magic and then specifically designing around those so that you don't have them. And I am always a fan of a game that plays quickly because I will, in general, when I'm not playing Stasis and Counter Phoenix, I will have more fun playing 10 3-minute games of aggro decks fighting each other rather than one 30-minute game. It just feels better to play a lot of shorter games to me. And so those were the kind of feedbacks I gave to Gustavo and his team. And hopefully we'll see what they incorporated into the game. Now, I have not seen a finished version of this game. Like I said, they sent me a pre-alpha version about November of last year, and I gave feedback on it, and we talked back and forth over probably about 6 weeks or so that I worked on it with them. Uh, Besides the pre-alpha version, I received no compensation. We've discussed potentially running a sale with my patrons at some point if the game makes it through the Kickstarter and continues onwards. Now, you're here at Final Trade where we are those crazy people out on the margins of this ecosystem and we're investing in TCGs and playing them for fun and things like that. Is this investable? No, absolutely not. And I was having a discussion with a patron merely 2 days ago talking about new TCGs and investability. And something I said to him at that time was 98% of new TCGs fail. And even once a TCG gets a year or two into its life, if it makes it past the initial run, if it's a Kickstarter TCG, if it makes it past the Kickstarter campaign, if it fulfills its Kickstarter promises, and then it goes on, even if it makes it a couple years, it still probably has about a 90% chance of failure. And so, what I would tell everyone out there is no, this is not investable. Don't buy into it thinking you're going to hit the jackpot because odds are you aren't. Look at their marketing materials, look at their gameplay demonstrations, look at things like that. And if you think this is a game that you could enjoy playing, then support the Kickstarter. Because odds are there is no giant lottery ticket at the end of this for anyone holding sealed boxes of Hero Valor back in their closet for the long term. There's a tiny, narrow chance it's possible, but odds are very much against it. Support this project if you're interested in the gameplay, if you're interested in having one more game and the pre-constructed decks for it for people to play. And so there is a support level on Kickstarter for 4 pre-constructed decks. I'm going to buy that one and support them with that so I can see what the final product after the input that I was allowed to give was considered and hopefully at least some of it made it into the game. So what I'm interested in for the future of this game is one, getting some pre-constructed decks, seeing how they changed from the kind of pre-alpha product that I received 11 months ago to this final release version now. I'm interested to see what happens with this company over time since I actually know the lead guy in charge of it and have conversed with him and had some interaction with him in the development of this game. And so I'm interested to see what his journey on attempting to run a TCG company, develop a game, bring it to market, and attempt to have some success with it is to see how that goes for him and see what kind of lessons I can get out of it. And I thought it was very, very enlightening for me to be included in that kind of pre-alpha developmental side of things where I could say, hey, you have all these additional knobs you can turn that are not firmed up by the game being released yet. Here's some things you could consider doing. I had a lot of fun doing that and kind of exploring how do we think about games differently when everything is possible? When it's a brand new game that hasn't been released yet and you can literally suggest anything. Mark Rosewater says he will never bring banding back to Magic, and I believe him. I believe Mark Rosewater will never bring banding back. Hopefully, one day a different lead designer will bring it back. But when a game is in its pre alpha state, it's still a developmental product, well, you can do anything you want. You have no one telling you that something is impossible. And so that was a lot of fun for me to be involved with this. Now, one last thing Gustavo made a promo card for me as a thank you for doing this. He sent me, I believe, 300 copies of it, and we will work that into something in the future if we get to the point of doing something with my patron program, say after the Kickstarter completes and after those orders are fulfilled, if we have the opportunity to do something like him provide me with boxes to sell to my patrons, I would include those promo cards for my patrons if they wish to order that product at that point. So we'll see about something like that in the future. Gustavo, thank you for including me in this and just giving me the opportunity to see this different side of the games and the development instead of always being downstream of that, where basically my creativity is limited to deck design, which, man, I will admit I have never been great at. So piloting decks, I can get that down and I can do near optimal piloting of decks, but deck design is something I've never been good at. And being on the front end of the game and being able to give input, not just on the game design, how it feels to play, the card interactions, the card design, all of those things, but also the business side stuff of, what are your plans for getting into stores, for developing relationships with distributors, for all these other things. So it was interesting to get in on that and see that side of things for once. So thank you, Gustavo, for that. If you're interested in checking out Hero Valor, I will have a link to the Kickstarter program in the description below. Go check it out. This is the first day of the program. Like I said, I'm going to order the, I believe, $35 for pre-constructed deck pack so that I can see how the game evolved from pre-alpha then into my suggestions that I made amongst other people they consulted with, and now into a final product. So I'm excited to see that. And when there are updates to this in the future, I will let you know. So go check it out, guys, and give it a shot if you think it's a game you would enjoy adding to your shelf of games that you play with your friends and your family and your kids and everyone else you love. So let me know what you think, guys. Thanks to everyone who makes this content possible, especially my very generous supporters on Patreon. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade.